Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome everybody to the IAEA Pavillion side event organized by Nuclear for Climate. I would like to thank all the public for being curious and coming here. So, my name is Otero. I'm a nuclear engineer from Spain and currently based in France. And I will be serving as your moderator today for this nuclear type of myth-busting event. So, as you may know, nuclear technology, and particularly energy production, causes a lot of controversy and debate. And since climate change has started to raise a lot in our daily conversations, it is a bit inevitable that we all make ourselves the following question. Is nuclear energy part of the solution? Is it really? Is it not? Maybe too dangerous? So we're having today this event to clarify for the public some of the preconceived ideas that we have, so the public might have a more complete information. So before starting, I will give a brief introduction to give some context. We all know that one of the main problems to climate change is the energy consumption. According to the International Energy Agency, one of the main and most important causes of climate change is the energy consumption. According to the International Energy Agency, the total energy supply is growing by 1.3% year after year, in average from 2020 till 2030. This is happening with the current energy policies. So from this energy supply, up to 84% of this energy consumption comes from fossil fuels. And this is a huge amount of energy. So we still have a long way ahead. But on the contrary, we're not advancing fast enough. So many questions come up to our minds, and we ask ourselves, which is the fastest way to tackle climate change, to install all the energy transition worldwide? So here with us, I'll be presenting some questions that each of my speakers here are going to answer. And also, I want all the public as well to participate. So for each question, I will be presenting 4 or 3 possible answers. And I will ask you to raise your hands. I will say option number 1, option number 2, option number 3, and you will raise your hands. And also for the people that is watching us in streaming, I will ask you as well to participate on the streaming chat on YouTube. So I'll present the speakers today. First, we'll have with us Ms. Madison Hilly, an environment and political science expert from the United States and founder of the campaign for a green nuclear deal. Then we'll have with us Brianna Lazerwitz, energy economist at the International Energy Atomic Agency. She's an expert in policy analysis, international economy, and on the analysis of energy systems. Then we'll have with us Shirly. She's a nuclear engineer coming from Peru and currently based in the United States. Specialized in advanced reactors refrigerated by lead, and a counselor of the Generation Atomic Association. And finally, we'll have with us Mr. Keefer, emergency medicine physician from Canada. And he's a quite active pro-nuclear climate and clean air activist, senior editor of the Couple Media, where you can follow all the podcasts on Spotify and YouTube, and the president of Canadians for Nuclear Energy. So I'll start now with the first question. This question will be for Madison Hilly. The current public opinions about nuclear energy is centered rather around. So there we can see all the different there we can see all the different options. Option number 1 is the benefits of nuclear energy, low carbon, energy density, and low land use, or the concerns around long-term solution to spent materials like the fuel or fuel assemblies, etc. Option number 3, there are some concerns about safety, but we don't have any other option that keep using nuclear energy. And number 4, like the opinions are rather neutral. Too complicated. So, from the public here, who votes for option number 1? No one? From option number 1? Okay, and who thinks it's option number 2? See more people voting? Okay. And option number 3? Okay, I see one person there. And 4? Who thinks it's number 4? Okay. So the people on streaming live on YouTube, they can also vote on the chat. And I'll let Madison Hilly explain in more detail this question.
Hi, thanks, Anna. So it seems like a lot of us agree that nuclear power is really defined by concern and not by the benefits, whether they're environmental, security, or economic. And I think that's largely true. I've been a pro-nuclear advocate for 5 years and have had the privilege of traveling around the world talking to policymakers and journalists and members of the public in North America, in Europe, and Asia, now in Africa. And one of the questions, regardless of age, regardless of ethnicity, nationality, gender, that I'm always asked is, what about the waste? And so a few days ago, I was preparing to do this panel, and I decided to just do a simple Google image search of nuclear waste. And I took a screenshot of what I found. If someone can click to the next slide. Do we have a slide clicker? Oh, yep, there it is. So nuclear waste, no other context, and this is what we see. Large, what look like oil drums, largely bright yellow and glowing. Some of them have liquid leaking out of them, and they look to be strewn across the landscape. So it really speaks to the power of culture of the US that a lot of these images seem to come from The Simpsons or that sort of image of nuclear waste. And as an environmental sciences major, nuclear waste not only is not a problem, I actually think it should be the technology's chief selling point. But I don't think people normally get to see images of what nuclear waste actually looks like. And if we could go to the next slide. So that top left corner picture is me taking a selfie with the nuclear waste facility that we have in Illinois. And when we talk about nuclear waste concerns, what most people are referring to is the high-level nuclear waste. And I'm happy to report it's not liquid, it's actually solid metal. So in that picture of me demonstrating, that's a fuel assembly. So nuclear fuel is made up of uranium pellets that are put into metal tubes and put together in a bundle. And that's exactly what goes into the reactor to fuel it. That's actually what comes out as well. Then it sits in a pool, it cools off for 5 to 10 years, and then we put them into these large steel and concrete casks. As you can see in one of the above pictures, those are two of my friends hugging nuclear waste. And actually there's a picture also of a current nuclear waste facility we have that actually displays art. So very different than what exists in the public mind. But nuclear does have a problem, and nuclear waste specifically has a problem, which is that members of the public and policymakers think that there's a nuclear waste problem. Obviously, we can attest that the prevailing thoughts behind nuclear waste is that radiation makes nuclear waste uniquely dangerous, and the industry has no idea what to do with it. And that's simply not true. We know that radiation diminishes with time, and that in countries all over the world, including my home, the USA, nuclear waste is already safely managed. And nuclear waste just isn't that unique compared to other industries. We deal with toxic waste all the time, including lead, mercury, arsenic, ammonium, cadmium, things that never become less toxic. So yesterday there was a debate held here, and one of the chief talking points was nuclear waste is dangerous for 1,000,000 years. But every day across all industries, we deal with compounds and chemicals that are dangerous for 1,000,000,000 years, for 1,000,000,000,000 years, that never have that diminishing safety. But we don't talk about the fact that we can't have fertilizer. We accept that there are practices in place that allow us to safely manage those more dangerous compounds so that the public isn't exposed to them. So what do we do about that? So far, the industry, rather than have open, honest conversations about the waste, bringing people into these facilities, showing them the waste, allowing them to touch the waste, hug the cask, having field trips. Instead, they've talked about how in the future, at some point, we'll have permanent technical solutions to the waste issue. So in the US, so far we have spent $15 billion on the Yucca Mountain project, a project that will save 0 lives, prevent 0 cancers, avoid 0 injuries, but will have the negative effect of reinforcing the idea that nuclear waste is so dangerous that at great expense, it must be shipped across the country and buried in the middle of the desert, deep, 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 deep down, in order for nuclear energy to be okay. But it doesn't have to be like that. And there are amazing facilities already in existence today that demonstrate the potential for what nuclear waste can be like and the potential that the public has to interact with it. Specifically in the Netherlands, that's the image there that I've shown. And they have a facility that manages all of the country's nuclear waste. It's open to the public. I've actually gone to visit. They have art installations there. And you can actually walk on top of the highest level nuclear waste, which is under the floor. So I think that if we're going to change the perception about nuclear so that it is defined by the environmental and economic and security benefits that it offers, we need to start combating some of these negative public perceptions. And I think one of the best ways to do that is just bringing the public on by and allowing them to see it for themselves. I think the worst thing that could happen is that they're going to be extremely bored because, like I said, it's just a lot of big steel and concrete containers. But the best thing that happens is that it replaces the scary images that are in their mind and that they see on Google or social media with what's real, and maybe they'll learn something about nuclear along the way.
Thank you, Madison. So for the next question, which will be for Brianna from IAEA, it is as it follows. Renewable energy has been highly promoted to drive the energy transition and to mitigate climate change. Could nuclear energy contribute to the transition, and what is its role? So the options that we have, number one, yes, nuclear energy has a role to play in the energy transition. Two, maybe nuclear energy has a role, but I'm not sure about some aspects, such as the cost, could be too expensive, or the waste. Madison already has been answered to that. And number three, absolutely not. There is no role for nuclear energy in the energy transition. So this is just like a poll type of answers. So who thinks that it's number one? Okay, I see that, David. vast majority is voting for number 1. Who thinks it's number 2? Okay. And who thinks it's number 3? Come on. We're open to all opinions. Okay. Thank you. You're courageous. Okay. So I'll now let Brianna answer to this question and explain with more detail.
Thank you. I feel like we've had a lot of conversations today and across the past week where it feels a lot of times like the discussion is renewables versus nuclear. And there's some battle that's going on that we need to be playing, that these two technologies are at odds against one another. And I'm here to talk to you about how they can work together, and that actually we're going to need every solution available to achieve net zero, and why that should include nuclear power. So just some data so you don't think that I'm the only one that thinks these things or that I'm saying something without cause. Here we've got the levelized cost of electricity by technology. So we've got some coal plants, gas, nuclear. I'll point out in the center of the chart, there's nuclear, which is new build, and nuclear LTO, long-term operation, and how that compares to wind, onshore, offshore, solar. So the first thing I'll just draw your eyes to is the LTO, right? So the thing that we can easily see, and again, this is not a chart by me or my organization, this is the International Energy Agency, which is technology neutral, shows that the long-term operation of nuclear, when done safely, is the cheapest option for energy in the world today. And that nuclear is a little bit more comparable than maybe some other people would lead you to believe. But this isn't the only way to think about cost. So the other thing I'll just briefly talk about is how this levelized cost, or this cost per kilowatt hour or megawatt hour, is also not the only way to think about cost in an energy system. That when you're incorporating these variable renewables, you also need to balance that power. The sun isn't always shining, the wind doesn't always blow. We've heard this 1,000 times. The one thing that I will just keep reiterating is that it's the transmission lines that are bringing all this distributed power to your doorstep, and it's also all of the flexibility measures that are meant to make sure that you have lights shining and not flickering in your house. So that's one piece of the puzzle. The other is that hydrogen. We've also heard this hot topic in the energy industry. So not only are we talking about how much energy we're going to need in the future, but we're also relying on magical hydrogen to be able to provide even more energy for the future, which will also somehow be fueled. And so I would also like to pose the option of using nuclear to help provide not only energy to the energy system, but also paired with either electrolysis or electricity and heat to create hydrogen, which is more cost effective than using renewables or grid electricity because hydrogen operates 24/7, 365. So another big one that we often have questions about, and another reason that nuclear is very important in the energy transition, is this strange misconception that nuclear isn't clean. This, again, is not a figure by me. This is the UNECE, another technology-neutral organization through the UN, comparing greenhouse gas emissions from electricity generation technologies. This is what's called a life cycle analysis. So while operating a nuclear power plant emits very low amounts of emissions, this is everything. The construction, the waste facilities, everything is in this number here. And so you can compare with other technologies, but there's a pretty thin amount. It's pretty certain that nuclear actually emits less greenhouse gas emissions than other electricity generation technologies. This isn't to say the nuclear should be the only solution. What I'm saying is it is a part of the solution to get us to net zero. So the other one, this kind of battle, which actually it's a bit hard to see, but I'll give you the gist of it. So why not just build renewables, right? We've only got a set amount of money. Why are we bothering with nuclear at all? Okay, so this chart, while it's hard to see, is a bunch of countries that have decarbonized or have significant, more than 50% of their electricity coming from low carbon sources. What I just want to point out is the blue and the green, that all of these bars, every country that has more than 50% low carbon energy sources needed to do that through hydro or nuclear. So you can use renewables, but you need a reliable power source paired with those renewables to get you to significant levels of decarbonization. So this is something really important going forward. You need this reliable power to balance out the renewables. It's not an either or situation, it's and. And the last thing I'll just touch on briefly are SMRs, and I think we're going to get into advanced nuclear technology, so I won't go too deeply, but the other option here for decarbonization and for nuclear as part of the energy mix are small modular reactors or advanced reactors with increased, it's the new generation of technology, increased safety measures, and the other option is that it's a smaller reactor, right? So that's lower cost for construction, and it can plug and play in a grid that works a little bit differently than your traditional large nuclear reactor to provide another option to countries looking to decarbonize. And so I think I'll leave it there, and I'm excited to hear more from the other speakers. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Brianna. So yes, as we have seen, we need to consider all the entire costs from each energy source. It's very important to have the more complete and accurate information for each energy source so that we can study well for each case and each country, which is the best mix. And for the question number 3, which will be for Shirly Rodriguez, is as it follows. What can we do now to accelerate the deployment of advanced reactors? As we know, sometimes we see that it's a bit slow to build nuclear reactors, and especially new designs. So the following answers that I provide here is: number 1, advance the licensing processes. Number 2, educate the public. Number 3, engage with the stakeholders and investors, attract some investments. And number 4, all of the above. So who thinks is number 1? No? No idea? Okay. Then number 2, educate the public. Okay? I see some people agree with that. And number 3, engage with the stakeholders and investors, attract some investments. And number 4, the final one. Okay, like I see that most of the people agree, yeah. Okay, and we'll let Shirly Rodriguez answer to that.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I appreciate whether you agree or disagree. And thank you, Nuclear for Climate, to arrange this event. I believe in all of them. The first one, advanced licensing. As a designer of Generation 4 reactors, climate change is not waiting for us to deploy something. We must advance as climate change is need for a solution. Around the field that I am, there is a lot of opinions about whether or not we are going to deploy these advanced technologies in nuclear. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative. So I believe that if we start working on advanced regulations and policies and engage with them, we are going to reach the net zero by 2050 with the help of renewables, of course. I think we all have the same goal, but we need to work together. I hear the other day someone says, if you want to walk fast, walk alone, but if you want to walk far, walk together. So I think that's what we need to do. Education to the public, it's very important. I'm from Peru, but I live in the US now. I remember I was lucky enough to discover nuclear energy when I was 13 years old. And that's when I decided that I wanted to be a nuclear engineer. A lot of people don't have the opportunity of education like I did. So I'm very grateful for that. But it took me a while to realize that the benefits of nuclear are not just in energy. We have desalination, we have hydrogen, we have the medical field, aerospace, and others. And also, it is very important now that I am on the technical side that we need each company who is in the supply chain to make sure they foster a program of knowledge capture. There is a generational gap in our industry, and a lot of people, a lot of very experienced people are no longer with us, or they are retired. So it is important that we must pass that knowledge to others so we continue the legacy of advanced reactors. And the third one, which is, hold on. Can you put the options up?
Yeah, the third one is engage with the stakeholders and investors.
Engage with the stakeholders. Sorry, I'm not in economics, but I'm going to try to answer this as my best. I discovered that more companies are making decisions based on beyond economical purposes. They are more green focused, they are more environmental focused, and I think if we educate stakeholders and investors about the benefits of advanced nuclear with maintaining the reactors that we already have, we can move forward to our path of decarbonization. It is very important for me to make sure what I'm designing is attractive enough so people can invest and see their gains in the future. So I think that all three of them have to work in parallel. We must educate people and us as well. We must engage with the stakeholders, and we also need to make sure sorry. We also need to make sure that we work in parallel. I'm looking forward to questions. I know there is some people here who has more questions, so I'm happy to answer them after the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. So following the last question, number 4, what type of energy is the most compatible with a just transition for fossil fuel workers? So with option number 1, renewable energies, option number 2, nuclear energy, option number 3, biofuels, and 4, I don't know. So what do you think? Like, which option do you vote? Option number 1? Okay. It's actually happening. Like in countries like mine in Spain, we have some carbon power plants and minings, and they're trying to training them to renewable energies. And option number 2, nuclear energy. Okay. I see that, yeah, there's some people voting that option. And number 3, biofuels. Like, we are seeing combustion with that as well. Okay. I see one that's voting for that option. Number 4, I don't know. Okay. I will let Dr. Keefer speak, who is speak for this question about a just transition.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. I just want to start off by saying it is an honor to be on this panel. Everyone was very humble, and it's very difficult to sum up how amazing my co-presenters are. I've interviewed some of them on the Decouple podcast, so if you want to learn more about them, certainly listen there. But Shirley has the most extraordinary life story in terms of how she came to this. Maddie has, I think, probably the most viral tweet on nuclear that's ever happened. There were 26 million impressions on her waste tweet, so go on Twitter, look up @Maddie Hilly. And Brianna, future guest on Decouple, but what a great speech you gave. Very, very informative. So first off, a lot of people have questions for me as a medical doctor. Why do you devote so much of your time to promoting nuclear energy? And that is a strange question, even for myself, because 5 or 6 years ago, I would not have understood it. I'd have said that makes no sense. You know, my issues have always been human rights issues. I was a consulting physician at the Canadian Centre for Victims of Torture. I started one of Canada's first seasonal agricultural migrant worker clinics to serve Mexican and Jamaican workers who are very exploited within the Canadian economy. So again, why did I come around to nuclear energy? Well, you know, at the time of the birth of my son, who's now 4 years old, I started, like many in my generation, to think about the impacts of climate change. All of a sudden, you know, how far you think into the future grows by 80, hopefully 90 years. And I became quite doomy, as we often do, and I quickly realized that, you know, the answer to climate anxiety is empowerment, and empowerment is through education. So I really sought to educate myself, particularly on the solutions. Now, I'm from Ontario, Canada. It was part of that graph above. But Ontario pulled off what so many countries have not been able to. And that is that we got rid of coal. It is now illegal in Ontario to burn coal. It was 25% of our grid. Now it's zero, and nuclear power provided 90% of the energy to do that. You know, the challenge isn't only to produce lots of clean energy, it is to replace fossil fuel services. And nuclear can swap out for coal very well, and it's been demonstrated around the world. France is another example. So, you know, my clinical practice has spanned that coal phase out, and certainly I've seen a big decrease in respiratory illness and disease. It's been estimated by the Ontario Medical Association that we've avoided 600 premature deaths every year as a result of closing our coal plants from improvements in air pollution. 10,000 hospitalizations are avoided every year because our air is so much cleaner. And these fit into what we call the upstream social determinants of health. Because ultimately, we want to keep people out of the hospital. We want people to be as healthy as possible, and coming to the hospital is necessary, but it's kind of a last resort. And when we talk about social determinants of health, we're talking about very real things like, you know, what is the quality of housing in your country? What is access to education like? But the number one thing that comes up is your socioeconomic status. And so this brings us into questions of the just transition. I find when I start to investigate it that I don't find a lot of substance. There's a lot of marketing, a lot of nice photos of people in hard hats that don't have a single blemish on them posing in front of, you know, clean energy infrastructure. But I think we need to ask ourselves, you know, some hard questions. And first and foremost of those is workers that do have the benefit of just working conditions. Why is that? How did that happen? What's the sort of theory of change there? And you know, there's this dynamic balance where employers are trying to protect their bottom line, right, and potentially keep wages lower or erode some of workers' rights. I have to say the nuclear industry, I think, has probably got some of the best labor relations out there. But how do workers counterbalance those forces which might be pushing down wages? Well, obviously, it's through the right to strike. And so, you know, this got me thinking a lot about, you know, what are the technological options and how to look at the just transition from a technologically agnostic perspective. And having been, you know, invited by unions to tour nuclear plants, it's a pretty phenomenal environment. We really don't see a strong union movement in many sectors anymore, particularly in the West, because we've deindustrialized so much. And I remember going to the Bruce Power Plant and touring with nuclear workers, and you know, you hear everyone saying, my brother this, my sister that, and it's a small town, and you think, are you all related? But no, it's the union culture is very alive and well there. So let's examine again, in a technology agnostic way, what are the potential with each of these technologies, and why is it that nuclear energy has such high levels of unionization and such high wages and such safe workplaces, and make some comparisons. So wind and solar are interesting technologies. One thing that's interesting about them is they have low operational costs. Part of the reason for that is because there's no workers essentially at these facilities. There's no parking lot at a wind farm or a solar farm. There's occasional maintenance work, and then there's, you know, obviously a flurry of construction work when you're first installing the machines that harvest this energy. Now, you know, the supply chain for wind and solar is increasingly moving out of the West and into countries like China. China currently supplies 97% of the world's solar wafers, and unfortunately, We have a very serious situation in the province of Xinjiang, China, where there are credible allegations of forced labor of the Uyghur people, and that's where 40% of the world's polysilicon comes from. So we need to be internationalists when we think about a just transition. But essentially, those construction jobs, Jim Harrison, who's the director of renewable energy for one of the United, I've got the note here, but one of the energy worker unions, he says these jobs are very temporary, they're very precarious, and 2/3 of them are low skill. And the reality with low skill jobs is that it's easy to replace those workers. These jobs are often also in hard to access places, and there's a flurry of activity for a few months and then it's gone. So do those workers have a right to strike in terms of negotiating with their employers? Not really, and we see that in exceptionally low rates of unionization. And again, they're workerless facilities. So there's not an option once they're running for any kind of labor relations to occur. Now on the nuclear side, we have a lot of employment at our nuclear plants. In Canada, we have massive nuclear plants. Bruce Power, the largest operating nuclear plant in the world, with a current output of about 6,300 megawatts going up to 7,000. At that facility, there's about 4,000 people working in full-time jobs. And that plant, has been running since the 80s and is projected to run into 2060. And so what we see there is intergenerational, high-skilled jobs. And these are jobs obviously in the STEM fields, in the skilled trades, but there's really a job for everyone at these plants because the needs of a nuclear plant are quite broad. And, and the wages tend to be quite high. There tends to be a more favorable labor management environment in these institutions. So again, as a result of, just transition is a very important question for me. Obviously with the activist background that I had pre-labor, and always thinking about upstream medicine and having that lifelong commitment to activism has made me really analyze what our energy choices are. And they are stark, and they have stark implications for workers and for socioeconomic status. So I'm gonna rest my case there, but very open to questions, very open to having my cognitive biases challenged. But thank you for giving me your attention, and wonderful again to be on stage with this awesome panel.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, in order to apply a good energy transition, a just energy transition, we have to take care of all the processes, like also in nuclear energy, renewables, biofuels. It's very important, like where do we take the resources and that all the workers have the good rights. So now we will pass to a round of questions from the public, questions and answers. So if anybody has a question, can pass them the microphone. Okay.
So what if the wrong people put their hands on nuclear energy? I mean, how strong are these security measures, or how do we make sure it's not in the wrong hands, like nuclear energy?
So before I started designing reactors, I used to go to outages, which is the time in which we maintain the reactor. We change the fuel, we make sure that the casks are in great conditions, we do inspections, visual with machines. A lot of people enter there. And I personally experience the high security that every nuclear power plant has. I had to, when I remember before I had access to it, they run through my background for 10 years before I enter there. I don't think something like that has ever happened. I don't know if you, let me finish first. So, like I said, I personally experienced the entrance of the reactor and the process to enter. But we also, right now, since we are moving or facing towards data transformation, we are implementing cybersecurity. We are transitioning to innovation. Yeah, it's very secure, at least to me.
If I can just say one quick thing. So the only terrorist attack that has ever occurred on a nuclear plant was a Greenpeace activist who launched a rocket-propelled grenade at the Super Phoenix facility in France. He didn't serve any time for this, and later on he became a green politician in Switzerland. So that's very interesting. But in terms of the security, these are such hardened facilities. Containment, 1.2 meters thick, full of rebar about this big. And as you saw with the spent fuel containers, these are very robust structures. We've have flown airplanes, crashed trains, full trains, cargo trains obviously, not passenger trains, into these structures, and they are incredibly resilient. So security is a concern, but I think there's a misperception. Oh yeah.
Chris didn't finish the story, but when that missile was launched at the Super Phoenix, it just bounced off. No, the plant was fine. So it's important to...
Thank you.
Since I'm here in my capacity as a representative of the International Atomic Energy Agency, I want to draw attention to actually what is happening in Ukraine, the security at the nuclear plant there, and that there is IAEA personnel physically located at the plant. We have gone during the conflict to see the plant, and I have been in nuclear reactors that are under construction, and you can see cameras everywhere that can view every piece of that reactor. Those are operating constantly, and the biggest part of my agency is the safeguards division, and that is their complete job, is to make sure that these nuclear plants are operating safely around the world, and they are watching those feeds constantly. So in addition to all of the hardening of the actual infrastructure itself, there are people and organizations tasked with making sure that nuclear is safe and operated safely.
All right.
Well, thank you very much for your talk. It was quite informative. I have two questions. One is technical and one is a bit of like a matter of public policy. My first question is that if you see all the technologies abroad, across the board, they have evolved into advancement. But when we see the nuclear energy technology, it has almost remained static for about last 3-4 decades. Not much of it has happened. And that's why the danger emanates from the technology being static. My question to you is that what are the chances that this technology may evolve in the maybe next coming decade as to be even like more safe, or you see it's easier to harness the energy from that technology? This is my first question. My second question is that the most population of the world resides in maybe Asia, South Asia, and these regions. But presently the nuclear technology is being used only by in places where the population is not like too much. So how come we can help the rest of the world, because the access to this technology is so restricted that if you continue using only on the G7 or G8 countries, it won't help climate much. So what is the solution out of it?
So let me repeat the first question. The first question was about policy. Is that correct?
The first question was evolution of technology, the energy technology in atomic reactors. It has been static for like 30, 40 years. It's not changed. So is there any possibility in the future to improve this technology, or to bring about a complete change in how we harness
So in the
atomic energy?
50s, yes, so in the 50s, the majority of the designs cover 1,000 megawatts. Right now, the small modular reactors go from 0 or 15 megawatts to 300 megawatts. And I'm designing some of those. So yes, there are some designs from the past. We are acquiring the best design that was in there and improving them. I'm working on liquid metal, to be more specific, sodium to be more specific. Light water reactors, that's also something that I designed previously. But again, it needs to be in parallel with policies, with regulations. Yes, and not just new designs, but also, again, data transformation. We need to, like right now I'm working on digital twin. I don't know if you all know what digital twin is, but it will optimize and everybody will have access to it in order to have preventive maintenance to the entire power plant. So yes, I'm designing those. I think it's possible, but again, we need the help of regulation and policies to deploy them. And the second question again?
And the second question is that a big chunk of the human population lives in South Asia, Asia. They have no access to this sort of energy, and their access to this energy is restricted. So if they are not using it, how would it help to achieve net zero when you cannot use it?
I totally agree with you. And again, that comes with education. For example, in Africa, that it says that the demand of electricity is going to increase by 80%, which means 3.8 per year. She mentions that the standard increment is 1.3. So that's more than almost double the amount. So that is, we need to go to the same pace. We need to make sure that developed countries provide the information, make sure we prove the technology so other countries can implement that in their regions as well.
Okay, so I love that we have a chance here to educate. In terms of the largest population centers in the world, certainly Africa is the fastest growing population. But China, for instance, that's the country with the largest population in the world at present, they actually have a booming nuclear industry. So they have around 48 reactors now. That's third in the world after France and the US for the absolute number. They have 20 under construction and plans to build another 150. And that's because in China, a lot of their energy is coal right now. It's in the northwest, far from population centers in the southeast. It's estimated that 50% of rail traffic in China is moving coal around to those plants. So in terms of being able to share that information with you, I think that's important. The second most populous country in the world is India. And India actually uses, they've indigenized it, but Canadian technology in the form of the pressurized heavy water reactor. Now, it's been a huge vision of India to harness their copious thorium reserves in order to build this out and have energy security. You know, it is frustrating that it has not pursued as quickly as it should, but they're actually building reactors at the cheapest cost per megawatt hour in the entire world. So, you know, there's challenges bringing this technology to Africa, but there are a number of nations that are very interested. Places like Ghana, Uganda, and, you know, South Africa currently has a nuclear power station at Coburg. They were in discussions with the Russians, you know, this was, you know, back in 2012, to build 4 of these large light water reactors, maybe up to 12 of them. So, you know, nuclear, as I mentioned in this just transition talk, is so exciting because it really levels up lots and lots of skills. I was talking with someone from the United Arab Emirates, not a massive population center, but the impact that building those 4 large reactors that now is 25% of their electricity has had on the skills of that country, leveling up everybody's education level and skills is transformational. And I'm very excited about those possibilities for, again, the sort of fastest growing population center in the world in Africa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley and Chris. So yes, actually, when we build a nuclear fleet in a country that doesn't have nuclear, you are forming an entire generation on that. Like this happened in France. When they built the nuclear fleet, it was United States that was coming, and it taught an entire generation. And the nuclear industry stayed in France. Problem is that with the years, the construction of power plants stopped, so a generation was lost. And also, like, the experience from the supply chain has caused a lot of problems and delays in power plants. And it's something that we need to learn. One thing is to study it in theory, and the other one is to live it, to do it in reality. It's completely different. You need a lot of practice and experience. So passing to the next person and question I saw over there.
Thank you very much. Talking about waste, I saw the pictures and all, and those bundles can still leak at one point and will need perhaps repackaging and need like really good control over them. From what I hear is that we do not have yet a DGR for heavy and high intensive waste. So when will we have something concrete about that to solve the problem? Because that's a major worldwide problem. And how about like the ongoing stewardship about that? And also in Canada, we still do not have a waste management policy in place. And we're working right now on a waste management strategy. So the strategy before the policy kind of thing. So I was wondering about that. And SMRs, the man here mentioned that technology, we've been talking about it for years and years and years. There were hundreds of designs. We're still not there, have one up and running, and we're billions and billions, invested in them. So there's a lot of concerns. And about education, I would like to hear more about public and civil society participation in the process, in all the processes, in a transparent process.
So before I turn this over to Chris to address the more Canadian side of the question, I just want to say, at least from a U.S. perspective, those casks are licensed for 100 years. I mean, Shirly said not only was she involved in the inspection, but I didn't mention one of the main reasons I am not interested in putting nuclear waste underground is that is future fuel. When you take those fuel bundles out of the reactor, about 90% of the potential energy that could be used is still in that uranium. So what Shirley's doing is she's designing advanced reactors that can turn that used nuclear fuel into fuel for the future. In terms of the Canadian repository, do you want to talk about that, Chris?
Sure, I'll just add a little bit on to Maddie's excellent information, but she mentioned this exponential radioactive decay. So within about 20 years, 99.9% of the radioactivity is gone. Now that's not to diminish how hot this stuff is when it comes out of the reactor. I mean, it is insanely hot. Like if you were next to it unshielded a meter away and in 5 seconds you'd get a lethal dose. So I don't want to minimize, those very real concerns that this is potentially dangerous. But what's very interesting about modern society is that we make dangerous things very safe with engineering. And I like to make the comparison to the aviation industry. Most of us flew here. We were flying at 30,000 feet in a thin-skinned, pressurized aircraft, over oceans with nowhere to land, 10,000 plus moving parts that are mission critical. And somehow we managed to make flights so safe. There are 4.5 billion passenger flights every year on 42 million airplane flights, right? And on average, there's less than 200 deaths per year, far safer than driving, for instance. And so, yes, that radioactive fuel is hot as it comes out of the reactor, but there's this mystery. In the 70 years of storing spent nuclear fuel, there has not been a single fatality as a result. And I think that's a powerful reason why, workers, occupational safety is very important. The average nuclear worker in spent fuel handling gets a dose far lower than the average airline steward, right? So there is a huge education gap here. And I think Maddie was suggesting some of the ways that the nuclear industry needs to be very transparent. You'll hear that in France, the majority of people between the ages of 15 and 35 think that nuclear emits a lot of carbon. They think that the vapor coming out of the cooling towers is smoke, essentially. And that age group is very interesting because in the 1990s, up until the terrorist attack on 9/11, it was common practice for high school students to tour their nuclear plants. And again, France in 15 years commissioned 54 reactors, completely phasing out coal, oil, and most of their gas, right? And so that is the educational part that's really missing. In terms of the Nuclear Waste Management Organization in Canada, certainly there is a plan. They're consulting with communities right now. I mean, an absolute gold standard in terms of community consultation and consent. So there is an active plan in place. I share some of Maddie's concerns about it. Why do we treat this waste source that is actually quite manageable as if it's going to wipe out humanity? Again, that exponential radioactive decay, we're starting at 5,900 sieverts per hour. For reference, 10 sieverts is universally fatal, right? So again, respect it as it comes out of the reactor. We keep it underwater, that shields it very well. In about 200 years, standing that 1 meter away, you get the equivalent dose of about 4 CT scans. I don't know who would stand next to nuclear waste for an hour unshielded, but there you go. It gives you a sense. And again, in 500-600 years, the penetrating gamma rays are gone, and you're left with alpha and beta radiation. Alpha is blocked by a thin sheet of paper or the epidermis of your skin. You can actually handle that stuff. So when we talk about fuel in future reactors, we're able to do that once this stuff cools off. We can handle it more easily. And Russia's already deploying sodium fast reactors, and they're actually putting nuclear waste into them right now as we speak. So the West needs to catch up on that. And I really do sincerely hope that environmentalists start to recognize again that nuclear energy is a vital, vital tool. As we saw in those graphs, the countries that have achieved deep decarbonization have done so either because they are blessed with endless hydroelectricity or because of a significant portion of nuclear energy underlying that. I'm going to shut up now.
Thank you. I'm going to add something. I'm going to escape from my role of moderator one moment. You were asking as well about a public debate regarding nuclear, right? You were asking as well about if there is a public debate. Yeah. Just in France right now, there are currently many debates for the future sites where EPR reactors are going to be built. And last week there were the debates about the Penly site, and they were taking place in Paris. And in the next months, they're going to take place also in Lyon, in the area of Bouget, because it's another site where probably new EPR reactors are going to be built. So there's also a debate on that, and anti-nuclear groups are coming, citizens, also experts in nuclear as well. They're going and they're answering any questions, giving their opinions as well. So yeah, there's a citizen debate on the construction of new power plants. I'm sorry. I'm going to let the public speak if you have more questions. One last question? Okay.
Okay. Just I'm asking about how you can handle the cost between the nuclear industry and renewable energy, because we know the renewable energy have a many source, like wind, like solar, like other source. Can you suggest something? Because we maybe have extra expensive cost belong to the nuclear. It means for treatment or something for the waste, or maybe can have happen emission or something. Then the extra cost should be taken in your mind. How can you suggest for the African side to how can choose between us?
Thank you. So yes, there are lots of options and lots of different ways to think about cost. I think it's really, I'm glad that you mentioned Africa, because these countries are basically building up. You have so much energy demand that you need to meet that you basically get to redesign a grid from scratch. And so you have a unique opportunity to choose an energy mix that serves each individual country best. And so that is one of the things that we are seeing a huge opportunity for nuclear to serve many people, to give energy independence to a country. We're in the midst of an energy crisis where fossil fuel prices are extremely high, and you're relying on other countries to bring fuel to fuel gas and oil plants to certain countries. So you have also with nuclear plants, you have less of a reliability on other countries because the cost of uranium is such a small portion of the total cost of a nuclear plant. Yes, you mentioned it. They're extremely expensive to build, especially if you're comparing to a solar panel or a wind farm. But in my slides, I mentioned that it's not the only thing that you should be thinking about. It's not just the infrastructure that goes in the ground, that mechanism that provides or creates that reaction to provide electricity, but it's all of the other pieces together. It's the grid. It's if you have a bunch of decentralized energy generators, then you have to build the transmission lines to get them to people's homes or businesses. So there are many other pieces, so not just the transmission, but making sure that renewables are balanced on the grid, that you have power when you want to turn on the light at night, and that it's reliable for you no matter the weather, the rain or shine. So there are many different pieces to be considered when you're thinking about building an entire energy grid. And yes, there is a role for renewables, but I would like to pose to you that I think that there's a role for nuclear as well, and it can help serve these flexibility needs and deliver energy to the millions of people that are going to need it. So thank you.
Thank you, Brianna. We have to cut now, unfortunately. I'm sorry. We're running out of time. So thank you very much for attending this event. Thank you, everybody, to come here and also make questions. We just want to make a debate and take all of the ideas and make people complete their information and have it the most accurate possible. So thank you as well. A special thanks to IAEA for letting us, Nuclear for Climate, the opportunity to have this event. And thank you for the speakers for participating on the event. Thank you very much. So you can follow us on our website, Nuclear for Climate, or on the media like LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. And also, if you want to learn more about nuclear technologies or nuclear energy, you can enter into the IAEA website as well. They have a lot of webinars and formations. Thank you very much.